Good morning, everyone. Boker Tov. In this week's Torah portion, Jacob's family, children and grandchildren, taken back to the land of Israel to be buried in the cave of Machpelah. And we have a fascinating midrash that says that when it came time to bury Jacob, Esav, the twin brother of Jacob, shows up and says, "Not so fast." He says, "I inherited one of the two plots. One Jacob used to bury his wife Leah. The second one is my inheritance from our grandfather Abraham, who purchased the cave of Machpelah." So the brothers, the sons of Jacob, said, "Yes, our father told us that he purchased it from you. It was yours, but he purchased it." He says, "Where's the documentation?" They said, "We left it back in Egypt." Says the Medrash, they sent Naphtali, who was a fast runner, to go back to Egypt to get the deed of the sale of the remaining plot in Machpelah so they could bury Jacob. Meanwhile, Jacob's coffin was sitting around waiting. So there was a grandson of Jacob. His name was Chushim ben Dun, and he was deaf. And he asked, "What's going on?" He couldn't hear the conversation. So they explained to him, I guess in sign language, the whole story. And he said, "What? Our grandfather Jacob's going to sit around waiting while they go get the documentation? This is a disrespect." And he took a sword and beheaded Esav. And the Medrash says that the head of Esav rolled into the grave of Machpelah. And then they proceeded with the funeral of Jacob. And until this day, there are 4 couples in the cave of Machpelah: Adam and Eve, Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Leah, plus the head of Esav. And not getting into that discussion of what happened, the question is, why from all the children and grandchildren was the only one who acted was this deaf grandson Chushim? And the rabbis give a very fascinating explanation. They say, there's something called the frog boiling a hot pot of water frog experiment. They put a frog into a boiling pot of water, or actually plain water, and they start raising the temperature slowly, hotter, until the frog burns alive. And the question is, why doesn't the frog just leap out of the pot? And the answer is that it happens so gradually that the frog gets lulled into normalcy, into a sense of complacency as the water gets hotter and hotter, and doesn't even realize that it's getting burnt alive. Had it been a drastic turn of the fire from cold to hot, the frog would jump out. But because it happened over time, it became acceptable to the frog. And this is true in life. All of us sometimes, there are certain circumstances that should be unacceptable, intolerable. And we should immediately say, "No, this is wrong, black and white." But we get into a conversation, a discussion, and suddenly we hear justifications and rationalizations, and suddenly something that would have been unquestionable suddenly starts to become reasonable and logical, and we forget how outrageous the situation is. And this is what the rabbis explain. All the other children and grandchildren started to listen to Esav's complaints, and even they knew he was lying, that he had sold it to Jacob. They started to reason with him and discuss it with him, and then they said, "Let's go send Naphtali to bring the documentation." But because Chushim was deaf, he didn't hear any of this conversation. And to him, it was a stark disrespect to his grandfather. And he said, "Why is grandfather laying here? Why aren't we proceeding with the funeral?" And when he heard they were going to wait until Naphtali returned from Egypt, he said, "That's unacceptable." And he acted, killing Esav. And the lesson for us in life is that, yes, we always have to try to have dialogue and conversation and discussion, but there's certain things that are not open for discussion. And this came to light yesterday when President Trump held another press conference at Mar-a-Lago. And in the room was Steve Witkoff, his ambassador for the hostage negotiations. And President Trump called him up and said, "Tell us what's going on." And Steve Witkoff said, "Thank God, things are looking very promising. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but we hope that by January 20th, we'll have good news to share." And then President Trump once again reiterated and said, as I said once before, and I mean it, if the hostages are not back by Inauguration Day, all hell will break out in the Middle East. And whether it's Hamas or Iran, everyone is going to feel it. And he went on to say, these hostages should have never been taken in the first place. October 7th should have never happened in the first place. But now that it did, these hostages must come home now. And he went on to describe what they did to Shani Luke, dragging her by her ponytail in the back of a pickup truck, and how horrific and how unacceptable it is, and how he will not tolerate it. And I said, what a breath of fresh air. Everyone else has been lulled into a sense of normalcy. Oh, they've been there 400 and something days. We've come to negotiate and to discuss and to rationalize and to explain and to understand. And President Trump said, no, this is outrageous. These innocent men, women, and children should have never been taken. They are grandparents and grandchildren and babies, the Bebas babies. They must come home now. And I'm not discussing it. I'm just warning them, all hell will break loose. That's what we need, moral clarity when it comes to issues of good and evil. Have a wonderful day.